fast, I knew equipment, I didn't know soils, I didn't know crops, I didn't know, and every time I turned around, I found something else I didn't know. And the last few years, I really started looking more at soil biology, and that's where cover crops really come into play. And again, cover crops, Mark said they've been around for years. In a way, the set-aside program back in the 50s and 60s was a cover crop for erosion control. This is a picture from a cooperative producer I work with, cereal rye cover crop. Good slope there, very little soil movement because he's got the roots and residue there anchoring things. And again, the cover itself, that's where the name came from, cover that soil. In some areas, in Nebraska we're doing a lot, we're looking at concentrated flow areas of the cover crops. Maybe it's not the entire field, but down in this concentrated flow area, again, absorb the energy of that flowing water. You can see there's another concentrated flow area in the background that was not protected. So again, we're seeing the erosion control aspects, and that's where a lot of times the funding from what I consider the public groups is coming from. In Nebraska, it's natural resource districts. For most of the rest of you, it's saltwater conservation districts. But they're going to put the money out there because water quality is so important to them. When you start looking at cover crops, though, I like to look at what it's doing to the soil. A good friend of mine, Ralph York, gave me this picture. Cover crops protect and provide carbon biomass for the soil, build and protect the soil. You go across South America, almost everybody's using cover crops. It's because of the rainfall they get, the growing season they get, and it becomes a no-brainer when you're in those kind of situations. But I like to think it's a no-brainer anywhere when you start thinking about soil biology. And again, from Rolf, what long-term no-till soil looks like. You know, when it comes to tilled soils, they'll never look like this. When it comes to no-till, they start to look like this. It's the living root in the soil that really makes it look like this. And when I say living root, you've all probably seen this kind of list before. I always like to reinforce that it is a systems approach. That first step, minimal soil disturbance, that's what no-till's been all along. Keep the soil covered, that's what no-till's been with residue. But I want to keep it covered the year round. It might be growing vegetation as well as the residue. That's where cover crops come into play. Diversity of plants. When it comes to feeding the soil, it's just like you and me. We like the diversity of food, so does our soil biology. That's where diversity of plants is needed. Living root year round. There's a lot of work now that it's not the carbon biomass produced on top of the soil that's building the soil health, it's the root exudates below the soil level. And I really start picking on some of my cohorts at the university that spend far too much time on looking at what's the biomass produced above ground. No, it's what's the soil life being fed in the soil. And that's where we got to start thinking differently when it comes to evaluating cover crops and what's happening in the soil. Integrate livestock. To be truthful, the research farm where I work, we don't have livestock. A lot of producers are using the livestock. The livestock's a twofold thing. One is just help the system cycle. The other is potential income when it comes to grazing cover crops. To me, that's on the bottom of the list because to me, that's now a different function than a true cover crop when it comes to building the soil. But again, they work together. There'll be some presentations on livestock as well. But again, cover crops, I get the phone call all the time. I'm sure many of you do. A producer calls, I'm going to plant a cover crop. What do I plant? I'll say, what are you trying to accomplish? Well, nothing personal. NRCS has got this program on cover crops. They're going to pay me to plant a cover crop. Well, what is your resource concern? They have to answer that before they know what to plant. Too many people think it's just cover crops. We go out and plant this. No, why are you trying to accomplish? Top of the list, I put erosion control on. NRCS has that on top of their list. A lot of our saltwater conservation districts do. Nutrient capture, nutrient cycling. You go to Delmarva Peninsula, there's a lot of cover crops. Pennsylvania, the dairies, a lot of cover crops being used to take manure and apply nutrients and put them in a biological form so they don't run off into surface waters. Lake Erie, we're seeing a lot of cover crop adoption because of that. In Nebraska, it's our hybrid seed corn production. Hybrid seed corn is over-fertilized and over-watered because it's a high-value crop. Plant the cover crop into that hybrid seed corn such that after the growing season, the cover crop grows that excess nitrogen, excess water in a biological form rather than losing it down to our groundwater. So again, when you look at that, improve soil health, that's what I'm after. The long term, the short term, it doesn't improve. Short term, it doesn't show up on the spreadsheet next year. But if you're going to pass the land on to the children, to grandchildren, it's definitely worth that one. Water management, I call it a three-edged sword. You go further east of here, some of you are in a higher rainfall area, you're using up excess water to cover crop. You go farther west of here, evaporation from the bare soil surface is much higher than a lot of people thought. If we grow a cover, keep the sun and wind off the soil surface, we can actually save water compared to how much evaporation occurs. Now, those two people are going to select different cover crops. Out west, it's going to be a low-growing cover crop that provides some biomass and some residue quickly without using a lot of water. Back east, it might be a cover crop that grows huge and uses a hell of a lot of water. So again, what's your resource concern? I said a three-edged sword. That third edge is sort of band right through here, especially when it comes to a fall planting cover crop. I don't know next spring is it going to be wet, cold, hot, dry. Makes a difference in which cover crop I select. But the third edge is a little harder to figure out. Increase biodiversity, yes, get some different roots out there, get some different crop patterns out there. Balance carbon nitrogen ratio. When I'm working with no-till, I get a phone call from a farmer, and you get the phone call and he says, how do I deal with all this trash? You can tell he's an early no-tiller, he doesn't have any soil biology, it's not residue to him, it's trash. That cover crop needs to be a high nitrogen content, or legume, broadleafs, to get that carbon to cycle, to get rid of that trash. Me, I've been in no-till so long, my soil biology is so high, I plant a high carbon cover crop, so I'm trying to get more carbon out there. My residue disappears too fast. So again, it depends where you're at in the soil biology of which cover crop you're going to select. Nitrogen fixation, as Mark said earlier, cover crops aren't really new. Set-aside programs in the 50s and 60s. 50 years ago, my first job for Dad was riding the wagon on an N-gate seeder, 2 scoops of oats, and a coffee can full of alfalfa, or red clover, or hairy vetch. We're fixing nitrogen for the next crop. Now the bad news was, back then we thought we had to plow it under. We still fix nitrogen. Now when it comes to nitrogen fixation, you gotta be careful. Make sure you have the right inoculant for the legume you're growing. Just because you have a soybean history there doesn't mean that hairy vetch is gonna fix nitrogen, or winter peas. Make sure the right inoculant is there. Reduce compaction. I like to think more making the soil more resistant to compaction by building better soil structure. So I use a lot of fibrous roots to build structure. I use some tap roots to open up the soil. And I hope there's no radish salesman here. I think the radish salesman did a great job of hiring some great PR firms to promote radishes to grid compaction. They'll show you a radish this big around, this long, holes in the soil. Well, if I got 4 months to grow it, I can do that. But in Nebraska, when I harvest corn and soybeans, it's already too late to plant radishes. Why bother? Plant after wheat, after corn silage, after whatever. So again, we gotta be careful when it comes to reducing compaction. Tap roots I like, but I also like fibrous roots to build soil structure, make the soil more resilient. Weed suppression, we're gonna have some presentations on that during the crop production sessions. I'm gonna show a couple of my observations. Provide forage grazing, to me I got that again at the bottom of the list because that's different management. It might be even different selection. Me, I'm trying to feed the soil. If you're trying to feed livestock, maybe I'm going to choose a different cover crop that produces more ground biomass. I'm going to choose a higher seeding rate because I need more plants. I'm going to put some fertilizer to it. I need a higher value feed. I'm going to expect it to use water because I'm producing feed. Now for me in dry land, not feeding anything, those 4 are greatly reduced. And again, when a client calls in and says, I'm going to plant a cover crop, I ask them where you get a grazer, and I go, I don't know, I'm going to wait until see what it looks like. No, you have to decide before you even plant because you don't know how to manage it. So again, to me, forage and grazing, that is now a forage or an annual forage crop or a grazing crop or whatever. We're going to hear about that throughout the day as well in the livestock sessions and on the farmer panel. I pick on some here in the front row because I know he's done that, taking row crops out of the rotation, put forage and grazing crops in the rotation. So again, we got to think about it differently. One of the keys is to make sure you've got some diversity out there. I've got wheat there, cool season grass, got peas, the cool season broadleaf, soybeans, the warm season broadleaf, corn, the warm season grass. Again, I like to have all 4 crop types and more out there when it comes to diversity. When it comes to diversity, I'm going to also think about pollinators. I'm going to think about things that attract the bees and the butterflies, things like that. So again, we start thinking about what to do out there. Now, I'm going to make a statement there, think. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to show you some things that I've been doing, some things I've observed, and make you think about what's going on out there. Been working with no-till since 1978. 1981, I established a set of plots, comparing different tillage systems, and here's just a picture of plowing versus no-till. Soybeans that are grown in grain sorghum residue. Now it's a corn soybean rotation. I got a warm season grass, warm season broadleaf. Need to think about soil biology and soil diversity. Now I have built soil structure of the year, I have built some soil biology, but it's got a living root only about 5 months a year. And with that soil biology, I have visitors come by. These couple visitors from the United Kingdom. They couldn't believe we're planting through corn residue that tall. That's about 200 bushel corn residue. We're planting soybeans. And a lot of farmers say, well, I can't do that because it rolls out the root ball. I say, well, the root ball rolls out if you don't have soil biology digesting the root ball. In their first year or two in no-till, you roll out a root ball. When you're in no-till, as long as I've been, they don't roll out anymore. My plots I started in 1981, they're in year 40 this year. They are still going continuous. When I went out to those plots a few years ago to disc on my spring disc treatment, I grabbed a hold of corn stalk, grabbed a hold of one from the no-till, held them up, snapped this picture. The one on your left is from the disc plot. There's next to no soil biology there because tillage has always killed it. The one on the right is from the no-till. Soil biology is rotting off the roots from below. Those nutrients in those roots are now available for the next crop. We need soil biology to cycle everything in the soil. You're out there spreading rock phosphate. That root can't take that up. You need soil biology to convert it. So again, we need to build soil biology. This is what I built with only 5 months a year living roots. I said, what if I incorporate some more soil biology and start working on that? And again, that's what I tell producers. Try to increase that biological diversity. Try to increase it. We have a lot of farmers in Nebraska put wheat back in rotation simply because it's a cool season grass and they got time for a cover crop after that. If you think about corn, soybeans has relative profit potential of 1. That's why most of the corn belt is corn soybean rotation. Wheat properly managed might be only about a 3/4. Why would you grow wheat? Well, after wheat harvest, you got room for a cover crop. That cover crop could be a short season forage for grazing. That might be another 3/4, might be only a half. Again, if you're growing one crop a year, why would you do it? When I got the 3/4 of the wheat plus the half of the cover, now I got 1 1/4 beets, corn, or beans. So putting wheat back in rotation pays for a lot of people. Adds crop diversity, it adds workload spreading, things like this. Put forage in the rotation. Again, a short season forage. Graze it, whatever. Use the cover crops, build the soil. Maybe you don't get paid today, but you'll get paid in the future as that soil gets built. And again, my long-term tillage plots, I started in 1981. In 2007, I added cover crops to a couple of the treatments. I had no-till with and row crop cultivation. No one cultivates anymore, so I dropped that one, changed it to with cover crops. I had a single disc versus a double disc, and I changed that to a double disc with cover crops compared to double disc without cover crops. Again, started adding the cover crops and start thinking about building the soil. Now, I get too many farmers out there say, oh, I've got this soil that's been really abused, it's been tilled for years, I'm going to recover the soil by growing cover crops, build soil biology. You're building soil biology is there. If there is none there, there's nothing to build. Now, you still protect the soil, you still grow some roots, you start feeding the soil, but it takes a couple of years sometimes to get cover crops going if you've got a really abused soil. If you got one that's already functioning quite well, I'm heating it and make it work better yet. Now, corn soybean rotation, those plots now, my cover, real simple. Austrian winter peas and cereal rye. You get my cool season grass, warm season grass, cool season broadleaf, warm season broadleaf in my mix going through there. Now, a lot of people said they've tried Austrian winter peas and you'll plant them, they look like that in the fall. Next spring, the rye is waking up, the Austrian winter peas frosted off, you go, why the hell did I waste my money? If you plant your Austrian winter peas deep, they work. If you plant them shallow or you surface broadcast them, they don't work. Austrian winter peas leave the seed underground, and for every node that's below the ground, a new branch will come off. You notice on top, in the middle of my hand there, that's the frosted off pea that we birds last fall. And below the ground there, and you can see I've lifted my hands up, planted about that deep. I've seen as few as 2, I've seen as many as 5 coming off when I plant deep. I love the Austrian winter peas. I plant them deep. Surface applied, forget it. It's not going to overwinter. Now, it depends where you're at, of course. Thing is you gotta, it's not a recipe for everybody, the same thing, same place. Even that pea that small, there's nodules already on it working for me. I love that. Unfortunately, in a cool spring, they only get about that big when it's time to plant my corn. They haven't fixed much nitrogen. In a warm spring, I've had a knee-high and flowering and fixed 100-pound sand. Again, that's sort of my three-edged sword. I don't know what next spring's gonna be. So I can't really plan on nitrogen fixation there. But I can plan on soil biology. Here's one of my long-term tillage plots. On the left side is no-till with the cover crops. This picture is taken in early March. The cereal rye is just breaking dormancy there, you see it. On the right side is fall chisel spring disc. Since 1981, this picture was taken about 2016. That tillage has killed soil biology. I'm going out there to do the spring disking to break that up so I can plant. And a lot of people say, we ought to till it to get rid of the residue. I tell farmers, no, if you want to get rid of residue, feed soil biology, let the residue get cycled by the soil biology. And again, on the right side there, I need my covers to grow more carbon because, well, soil biology is already eating what's there. So again, think about feeding the soil and keeping that soil functioning. My cover crop seeder, I drill virtually all my cover crops. I need seed to soil contact in Nebraska for how dry I am. In the fall, after wheat harvest, whenever, I need seed to soil contact. I know some of you are in higher rainfall areas, or some of you have irrigation. You can get by some surface heating depending upon the cover crop, but I like the seed to soil contact. But again, when it comes to soil biology, this is sort of a project where I've got corn, bean, wheat rotation. After wheat harvest, I'm seeding carbon versus nitrogen. After corn harvest, seeding carbon versus nitrogen cover crops. Started this project in 2005. Now that project itself, the base is 2 carbons, 1 nitrogen, or I add 2 more carbons for 4-to-1, or 2 more nitrogens for a 2-to-3 ratio. You'll say, so what? I'm looking at what happens to the soil. Well, I get a lot of farmers say, well, you go out and buy vertical tillage. I go, why? It cuts and sizes residue. I said, so does my drill. Well, vertical tillage puts residue in contact with the soil. I said, so does my drill. My drill puts a living seed in the ground to feed the system. This again is about 220 bushel corn residue. The day of seeding, that's why the cab door is open, so I snapped the picture. This is the same field the next March. The Austrian winter peas are up and growing. Where'd all that corn residue go? It's cycled into the system. I love that. Now 2005 was before everybody started talking cover crop cocktails. This is the only project I got left that's a single species, carbon versus nitrogen, just for the sake of research. I like cover crop cocktails to do the mixing to get more benefits out of that. Again, that's the Austrian winter peas in the corn residue. It showed you the rye earlier. The rye is just breaking dormancy. After wheat harvest, I've got a lot more growing season. I like cover crop cocktail. That drill I had there, you notice the corn residue is still standing? The wheat residue is still standing. This is already seeded to a cover crop. When that cover crop comes up, the residue is still standing there. Now again, depending on where you're at, standing residue keeps the sun and wind off the soil surface. For me, in dry conditions, that prevents the soil from drying out more yet. For fall seeded cover crops, standing residue catches snow cover, provides an insulating layer, so I like that. In my wheat stubble, you notice it's not a real thick cover crop. Remember, I'm not feeding livestock, I'm feeding the soil. I've got living roots everywhere in the soil. I like to have 2 warm season broadleaves, 2 cool season broadleaves, 2 warm season grasses, 2 cool season grasses, a couple of pollinators, a couple of taproot plants. I get a diversity, usually about a 14-way mix out there. Something's gonna function, something's gonna work. First time I started doing this, I just used warm season stuff because wheat's cool season. We had a September 10th frost. I covered it with a dud. This kind of mix, I got something growing all the way until winter coming. Now, I'm learned back to no-till when we didn't have all the herbicides. We were trying not to plant into weeds. Well, to me, that's about the same when you're just talking about planting green. So this cover crop, all frost kills. Next spring, I go out, plant. Don't have to spray anything. When I say don't have to spray anything, this is into wheat stubble. There is no volunteer weed. When it comes to weed control, when you've got something growing, Mother Nature doesn't start the weeds for you. We take care of volunteer weed problems by just simply planting a cover crop. Again, this is a lesson I learned back in the 80s. Roundup was $100 a gallon. I didn't want to use Roundup and plant into growing something. 25 years of doing that. Now the last 15, I keep hearing about planting green, planting into something. I have to change my thinking. I'm still learning. And so we're working on that. So again, when you start thinking about cover crops, I've talked about several things you got to consider. You know, what do you want to do is the very first question. It's not what do you plant. Can you grow it? you may hear about something and it might be great down in Alabama, but it's not going to grow in Nebraska. So again, can you manage it? Will it get out of control? Will it affect the next crop? And as an example of the next crop, we've got some guys who like growing sunflowers in the cover crop because of aggressive taproot. Some guys even harvest the sunflowers above the rest of the cover crop. But the mold in a sunflower is related to white mold in soybeans. Might affect the next crop. Likewise, Fusarium head scab in wheat, Fusarium stalk rot in corn is related. Might affect the next crop. If I'm planting beans in the wheat stubble, I got less of a problem. So again, will affect the next crop. What would the seed cost? That's the one I hear from a lot of producers. It's going to cost me too much to do it. Again, if I'm planting a half rate compared to the guys grazing, I'm already going to have the seed cost. Will it help the soil system? That's really what I'm after. When it comes to seed cost, I told you my corn, bean, wheat study. I said after wheat harvest, I plant carbon versus nitrogen for cover crops. Bin run grain sorghum versus bin run soybeans. If you plant your own bin run, you're okay. You cannot buy neighbors' bin run and plant it. You're violating seed protection laws. You can't go to the elevator and buy it and plant it. You're violating seed protection laws. You gotta pay attention to the rules out there. Seed cost, bin run grain sorghum. Grain sorghum sells for $3 to $5 a bushel. You plant 5 to 10 pounds per acre. That's 30 to 50 cents an acre for a carbon cover crop. Seed cost doesn't have to be high. Now, in my wheat stubble, I love those. They frost kill. They take care of my volunteer wheat for me. I'll talk more about weed control later. In the corn stubble, I already showed you the Austrian winter peas. Here's the cereal rye just breaking dormancy. This is corn, bean, wheat rotation. Left side is with the extra carbon cover crop. The right side is no cover crop. Again, I'm cycling the residue faster by feeding the soil system. And the yields are coming up. Now, a lot of people say, well, how much did it pay? I can honestly say across since 2005 until this last harvest, there was only 3 years that statistically the cover crop yield was higher than the no cover crop yield. It was never lower. Those 3 years, there was enough extra profit that paid for the seed for the entire life of the project. The yield increases some years were 20 bushel. Other years were 0 yield increase. So again, it's not a short-term turnaround on the balance sheet. It can be, depending where you're at, what the problem is. I'm going to learn a lot less in economic presentations today as well. So again, I got to think long-term. On that corn, bean, wheat rotation, the cereal rye and the Austrian winter peas, Roundup Ready beans. I says, well, let's let the cereal rye go a little longer and plant green because you keep hearing about it. And you can see my cereal rye starting to head, the beans already under there. My first shot of Roundup Ready beans took out the cereal rye. But look at the weed control in the rest of my no-till. I didn't need herbicide yet. So again, my long-term no-till, I'm not planting the weed seeds. I'm just cutting back on my herbicides. So again, we got to think about the systems approach. Now, when it comes to a lot of carbon residue out there, a lot of farmers say, well, beans in the rye works great, corn in the rye doesn't. And what's wrong with it? Well, there's a allelopathic effect. Allelopathic effect is on the germinating seed. The seed doesn't germinate properly. If the corn comes up and is yellow, that's not a allelopathic effect, it's nitrogen management. Nitrogen management, we have a set of plots. There's 3 sets of plots, one in the background, one off to the side, this plot here. We planted, these are little 50-foot by 50-foot demonstration plots. We didn't plant the first 10 feet, that's soybean residue. The next 10 feet was planted in either cereal rye, triticale, or wheat, depending which of the 3 plots you're in. And that next 10 feet was terminated a month before planting corn. The middle 10 feet there was terminated 2 weeks before planting corn. The next 10 feet was terminated the day we planted corn. And the last 10 feet, we actually took the residue off the day we planted corn. Look down the corn row. Is there a allelopathic effect? There's not. What we did, there's a little mark right beside the corn row. We ran starter nitrogen next to the row. 30 to 50 pounds overcomes that pale yellow corn, no problem. Now, if you surface apply your UAN solution on top, I guarantee that residue is going to tie up the nitrogen. Your corn's going to look puny and yellow. When it gets released later, when the residue cycles, the corn's already been hurt on yield because it didn't develop as many kernels around the ear. So again, extra starter nitrogen into high carbon cover crops, into high carbon residues like wheat, silver, corn on corn. That extra nitrogen with that planter right there. UAN solution not spread across the top doesn't do it. Now, this was cereal rye after soybean harvest. When it comes to other cover crops, to get more growth, depends where you're at. In Nebraska, we've got several NRDs out there, natural resource districts, that cost share cover crops because of the erosion control benefits for the public. And the one NRD's been doing it for over 20 years now, aerial seeding the cover crop. They got 3 different levels. They got cereal rye only for erosion control, they got a diverse mix to build soil, and they got a diverse mix of nitrogen to fix some nitrogen. And depending where you're at, what you're doing, out there aerial seeding, if you're an irrigator, right at leaf yellow, as leaves drop, cover it, the next irrigation, use your water, gets it up and growing. Turns out that there and the seed corn production is the only place we really see a lot of aerial seeding in Nebraska. And it's because we don't get rains regular enough after the aerial seeding to get up and growing. Further east you go, aerial seeding is a lot more workable because you get the rain. Further west you go, you don't see it at all. So again, here it's flowing on. This is actually a dryland field. It was flowing on. Cereal rye growing nicely at harvesting soybeans. This was a sandy soil. But that cereal rye, when it grew up and protected the soil surface to keep the sun and wind off of the next year, this producer reported that cereal rye cover crop was worth 20 bushels extra for it, just because the sand stayed cooler. So again, what is your resource problem? Not enough cover, grow some cover. We got some other guy who says, well, I can't afford the airplane, but you know, these high clearance spreaders can do it. Right at leaf yellow, he's a little bit late here. When the leaves are starting to get to the ground already, his seed stays on top of the leaf, you don't have any seed to soil contact. If you go much earlier, you don't get a lot of sunlight penetration. And so it's a trade-off on timing of that. In soybeans, that's the only place they'll cost share it in Nebraska. They don't do it in corn because not enough light gets to the soil surface. The NRD has been doing it for 20 years. One year they hired a helicopter. Airplane has to return to the airport to fill up. Helicopter doesn't. Seed are hung down below. He can spread about 40, 50 feet wide, depending on how fast he's running it. And the NRD had cooperators who were doing the 40-acre fields. A 1-ton tote at 50 pounds per acre was the seeding rate. And they went around on Monday, distributed these 1-ton totes at fields. On Tuesday, the helicopter showed up. Helicopter never had to go back to the airport. He didn't even land. He put the seeder down, hovered to the side. They loaded up the spreader. He went out and spread. They loaded a skid steer up on the trailer. It's just off the picture there. Went to the next field. They did 1,300 acres in one day because they were prepared. Get together with some neighbors. It works a lot easier. On a good year, their stand looks like this. Virtually everything comes up. It's not really uniform compared to a drill, but again, when you're feeding the soil, uniformity is not a major concern. Some years look like this, not much cover there. And that's where they started putting a lot of things that overwinter so they get more cover in the spring. Trade-off is there, they might use some water in the spring. We're down here in Missouri. Give some kudos to the Missouri researchers. I don't know if you guys are in the room here, but thanks for stealing, or let me use some slides. I'm not above stealing slides when it comes to sharing information. But again, when it comes to doing research, it's darn hard to get an airplane to do plots. To simulate that, these guys put spinner spreaders up on top, above the crop, spread it out. And here's one of the things why we don't recommend it in Nebraska. From their picture, a lot of seed fall down in the corn row, a little bit of moisture they sprout, then they die. That seed was wasted. Seed penetration of the soil surface and light penetration of the soil surface becomes important when you're spreading from the air. When you're spreading from the air, some of the Missouri work is similar to ours. They had some different seeding times. When the corn is dry and get more to the ground, the better off you are. If you wait that long, you might as well do it with a drill. Get good seed soil contact. When it's dry, about ear leaf, you get pretty good seed and light penetration to the ground. And soybeans, similar to our work in Nebraska, about when leaf yellow. Then you can get seeds done pretty good. In Nebraska, I mentioned hybrid seed corn production. This is a male row destroyer. There's a little rolling stalk chopper behind the wheels there that takes out the male rows. We'll spread the cover crop seed in front of that, get a little bit of soil incorporation, get the cover crop up and going as that scavenger crop. And again, it looks something like this later. And again, it doesn't look like much, but you just got a couple weeks extra growing. And for me, who can't use radishes and turnips because I'm seeding after corn and soybean harvest, they can use radish and turnips, great scavenger, good taproot. And after seed corn harvest, the covers look like this. A lot of those seed corn acres are grazed because they're trying to pick up any down ears. Excellent grazing. And again, what's your goal that you're trying to do? I'm not sure what this producer is. This slide I borrowed from someone. But again, a mechanical detasseler put a seeder on there and blow some seed down underneath. And this guy says, what do I even need tassels for after my commodity corn has been pollinated? He runs it in some commodity corn fields as well, seed and cover. And then come harvest time, he's got residue growing already underneath there. Or we got all sorts of farmers are inventing things. And again, these are just some I pick up along the way. Build a little higher clearance here, build a little wider. Matt was the first 120-foot wide seeder out there. There's a lot more now out there. Again, get the drops so you get it below the canopy. For this one, this is a field day. This is a little early to seed, but that's wwhy they're running there in that green corn. This one I love. He's been featured in several farm magazines. Don claims 14-foot boom height and 10-foot of clearance. I grew up in northeast Nebraska. The Reserve River Hills is on 30% slopes. I'd love to see that on those sidewalks. But he's using an air boom to release the seed above the crop canopy. I would have put drops on it. Right now, that's about the same as an airplane when it comes to seed placement, seed distribution. Not the same as an airplane when it comes to cost by the time you put that much money into it. So again, you got to think before you do something. Hagee's thought about it. There's other industries getting into it. Hagee's got an attachment for their sprayer. It's only $50,000 extra if you already own the sprayer. But again, here they're putting it on into soybeans here. Hagee played with getting some seed to soil contacts. Other companies are doing that too, is when it comes to interseeding or putting on into a growing crop. You can barely see it there, but they got a little rolling thing there trying to get some seed incorporation. When it comes to horsepower and the boom straight, those aren't getting real popular with tillage. They're getting more popular now with disc openers. And again, Hagee, you get out there pretty wide, putting the covers on. Again, dropping it below the crop canopy. There's some work on robots, drones, or swarms, or whatever you want to call it. This is demonstrated back in Pennsylvania at Steve Ross Field Day, where this is just works by itself. Goes down the road, comes out of the next row, works 24 hours a day. Well, except you got it out and refilled the seed hopper on there. But we got some guys looking at things like that. Why do I need bigger if I can work longer hours with robotics and a lower cost, more flexibility? We got a researcher in Nebraska who's got one who's setting up, his is 10 feet wide, does 4 rows rather than 1. But again, robotic. Now again, when it comes to some of these things, I will admit this is my biggest screw up when it comes to cover crops. This was up in the Dakotas. They called it the turnip seeder. They were seeding turnips into wheat, such that after wheat harvest, they had turnips already up and growing. The group that had this offered it to me for $20,000 because they were done with it. They were building a new one. $20,000 was a cheap toy to play with, and at that time, I wasn't sure if cover crops could work. That's my biggest mistake, studying cover crops, guys. But again, turnips into growing wheat. When the wheat was harvested, the cover crop was already there. I did build something for relay cropping. And again, it's similar to companion crop. You get something out there growing when you got another crop already growing. I had skip row wheat and I was planting soybeans, did that for 3 years in a row with this seeder that I built. So again, we got to think about some different options out there. Are you growing just one crop a year or are you growing multiple crops a year? Again, that corn bean rotation with some extra crops might make you more money when you start thinking about diversity. It drives the crop insurance people nuts. In Nebraska, those soybeans planted were not insurable, and the wheat was no longer insured because I planted another crop in that field. Talk to any crop insurance provider before you start doing companion cropping, relay cropping, whatever cropping, if you got the overlap there. Like I say, crop insurance, some people rely on it, some say I don't need it. Again, I said earlier, 2 scoops of oats, coffee can full of alfalfa or red clover or whatever. We did that 50 years ago. It was a companion crop for weed control, starting alfalfa was fairly common. We got some guys rather than alfalfa, they're putting in something like peas, early planted spring peas along with early planted oats, combine it, and using grain cleaner to separate the two crops. So we start thinking about companion crops, it's a little different. I'm not working on companion crops myself, but I've seen it some. Here is canola, a real small seed, with peas, a large seed, easy to separate. Again, some different things out there. Or we've seen some down here in Kansas. Sunflowers is a cash crop, but a short growing cover crop underneath. So when you combine the sunflowers, you already have the cover there. So again, we start thinking of some other opportunities out there when you start thinking about feeding the soil biology. For Gabe Brown, up in North Dakota, he's a livestock man, dryland corn production. He's got a 13,000 corn stand. You can see how much light makes it down to the soil surface. He's wasting sunlight energy without growing the companion underneath. Cowpeas brings up feed value when he chops it for silage or grazes it after harvest. So again, we think about some opportunities there to harvest sunlight, carbon dioxide, and grow something. Again, organic producers have been doing that for years. This is a slide down in the corner there. You can see it's from 2006. He was setting it up there to put it on when he's cultivating his organic crop, to put some nitrogen fixing covers out there. So again, the companion type cropping is not really new. We're just learning more about it. Again, with companion cropping, we're seeing all different ways of doing it. Showed the high clearance seeders. Here's some with rotary hoe with some little Intelligent Corporation rolling it out there. This producer was side dressing his nitrogen. He says, I can put an air seeder on there, blow some seed in front of that colder, get a little seed to soil contact there, get a cover growing with fertilizer for my cash crop. And we've seen some guys thinking about that. We've seen some farmers take conventional drills, take off a row, go out there and plant covers. This is actually a video I sold from the web that I didn't include it as a video, I just took this photograph for it here. Again, drills out there. Penn State University took it a step further and says, well, let's make a fertilizer rig that can seed the cover crop and herbicide if we need to. And this is a prototype they have. They're in production now, and they sell it for go out and they're doing a companion crop. Again, talk to your crop insurance provider before you do this. Well, farmers are building it and universities are building it. Doesn't take long for the industry to jump in if it's a moneymaker. Henniker, little high clearance there. Get in there, seed into that. The Dawn system here on a Miller Nitro sprayer. Again, we're seeing industry getting into it now as well. But again, we've got to think about sunlight interception. What are you growing? I'm not going to be planting cereal rye at V6 stage in corn. Again, what's your cover crop? Will this fit that type of system? Others are going, well, what about regular planting time? Again, he's got these available for combines where they can put it on. If you're doing it under corn harvest, you blow the seed under the corn head, such that the mulch from the corn head protects the seed. Soybean harvest, you blow it under the combine or behind the head, and the spreader in the back mulches the seed for you. So again, there's different ways of doing it. For me, if I'm going to wait this long, I might as well drag the drill in the ground, get some seed to soil contact. But that takes an extra tractor, extra person, extra whatever. For the guys doing this, I look at this little 8-bushel hopper here, and if I was doing cereal rye at 60 pounds per acre, there's a storm coming. Am I going to stop that combine to be filled with cover? If I'm doing 2 pounds of turnips, that 8-bushel hopper lasts a long time. So again, what's your cover? What are you seeding? Some guys use their air seeders, put out a cover where they're putting out fertilizer. I know some guys who are seeding covers while they're putting down dry fertilizer for next year's cash crop. Or this farmer, he set up for dry 2 forms of liquid or anhydrous. He's a custom operator, does about 6,000 acres a year custom for fertilizer and or covers or both. Depending where you're at, some people blend the fertilizer with the seed and just spread it. A lot of the areas of southern Iowa, we see that where they get the rainfall to get it up and growing. Michigan, still a couple slides for you guys. Again, mix it with manure, the slurry where it's injected. Who gets fair covers there? And again, the nutrients in the manure is now stabilizing in biological growing form. Or tickle it in here with an airway for seed to soil contact, or inject it here with Yetter openers. Feedlot manure, we got a lot of that in Nebraska. Pretty darn hard to mix cover crop seed with that feedlot manure. Pretty darn hard to get a uniform distribution. But we got a lot of guys using covers with feedlot manure. And that's what they're doing in the Delmarva Peninsula as well in manure application. And they're seeding the cover after the manure application, and they're seeding that to grow the nutrients up in a biological form rather than have it lost to runoff. So again, here's a producer in Nebraska, feedlot manure, radishes, rapeseed, soybeans, oats. He's growing that, protecting the soil, feeding the soil. We actually had a large chicken producer in northeast Nebraska who paid producers to raise oats just so they have a place to spray manure in the summer. Again, covers are a no-brainer for that. Biological strip till. This is one that's in some areas really popular. This is actually Dave Brandt's planter. In the row closest to me here, he's got pea seed. In the next row, he's got radish seed. I've seen it with different things from different farmers. The radishes, the peas, both frost off in this case. Here was radishes with sun hemp. Sun hemp's a legume, fixes nitrogen, high carbon, high lignin that stands up and catches snow. But radish is not dead yet. The first frost, the warm season got knocked off. The cool season get knocked off later. Here's Dave's, where that's actually radishes with his peas. Those radishes open up the soil. That's doing the tillage for the strip till. You go, huh? Again, here's Sarah Rye with radishes. That's in the fall when it's getting going. Here it is next spring. Radishes are gone. Sarah Rye is there. Biological strip till. They just plant down those strips, kill the rye. I got the residue between the rows, and I got no residue where the row is. Looks like they ran a row cleaner. No, that was simply biology, digesting the residue for them. So again, different things to think about. For me, a lot of my cover crops are killed early, because again, I hate to use soil moisture. Now what happens is I'm not truly all the way there. I'm getting more into planting greens. But a lot of mine are killed early. Some people kill them with tillage. Organic producers done it with tillage for years. With my long-term tillage plots where I put in with and without tillage for my covers, I find that the tillage operation to terminate the cover actually decreases the effectiveness of the cover. Think how far ahead some organic producers would have been if they would have no tillers. Now what it does do is offset some of the tillage. So again, it's still helping feed the soil system. Now this isn't a cover crop, this is just undercutting wheat stubble. So there are some people showing promise with undercutting the cover to kill it and leaving the residue on top, making sturdy soil biology here as much full with tillage. Another way to terminate cover crops, rollers. We see a lot of them in South America where they got a long growing season. We see a lot of them on single species cover crops. When it comes to the roller, it works great if the crop is in reproduction stage at the top. You roll it too early, you just knock it over, it springs right back up. Roll it too late, you'll still cake it over, but it might have already made seed. And so again, we gotta really time that and call it a cover crop roller here. It's actually a roller crimper. If you really wanna kill it, you need to crimp the stem so it dies. Just rolling it like with a rock roller, a lot of those spring back up because they keep the stem. But again, a multiple species becomes a little harder to time. This is sorghum Sudan with radishes. The frost already took out sorghum Sudan, and the radish, there's nothing there to roll. Again, it depends what your cover is. Will the roller even work? Steve Groff is modified roller from a rolling stock chopper. Single species works great. Again, we're in reproduction stage, rolls down nicely. Rodale Institute's doing work on it, hooking it in front of the planter, roll it down, planting time. So a lot of people say, well, when you roll it, some people do it at planting time, some do it after planting. The best recommendation on rolling is if you seeded the cover this direction, it's nice to roll a different direction to cover those bare spots between the rows. But if I seeded it this direction, the odds are I'm planting the rows this direction. I don't want my cash crop being planted cutting every piece of residue there is. I want to plant the same direction I rolled. So again, there's some management things you got to take into account there. Most people say the roller is the same width as your seeder. Whatever you roll the residue over, plant that direction. Others say plant first, roll later. Others say, let the planter be the roller. Terry Taylor, the narrow soybean planter, wide depth gauge wheels, rolls down. Doesn't kill everything, but it knocks it down enough that you get a seed in the ground, gets some sunlight down the soil surface, and he sprays a herbicide on there. Dave Brandt, again, narrow rows, rolls it down. Dave Brandt, now standing in his field. He lets his cover crop grow a little taller than I do. He's trying to use excess water. He's trying to build soil. Producer in Kansas I met. You'd be amazed what those seeders can go through if that's anchored and attached and you're traveling the same direction it's laying down. Again, his roller there is that John Deere drill. I'll talk more about seeding equipment later. Me, I'm spraying a load of covers out this tall, especially when I'm planting my corn and beans a mile early. I'm at Lincoln, Nebraska, which is a little ways north of here. Our target is to be done planting corn and beans a mile by May 1. I see, all right, it doesn't make it to reproductive stage. You use a roller. So again, I'm spraying it out early. Weed control. Again, from Ralph Dirks, black oats rolled down, organic production. That's his weed suppression there. Weed suppression, this is from Green Cover Seeds. They had a field day. This side's 20 pounds per acre, next side's 40 pounds per acre. The skip in between, you can see how much mare's tail there. 20 pounds, there's 1 or 2 escapes, 40 pounds, there isn't any. You got a lot of farmers cleaning up resistant weeds using cover crops. Single species here works fairly well. The research done by Sam Wortman in Nebraska says if you want complete weed control, he recommends at least 6 to 8 different species. At 2 to 4 in organic production, he did not have enough weed suppression. When he got to above 6, he did. This is an interesting one. They purposely plugged one row of their seeder when they're planting their cover crops, just so they can evaluate weed control. That's common oats. Look at the row they skip. How many weeds are in that row? If you grow something, Mother Nature won't. If you have a skip or a gap, whether it be your lawn, your garden, your field, Mother Nature will fill it in for you. Remember I mentioned mine, the winter kill? A lot of people think it's the growing vegetation. A lot of people think it's the decayed residue. A lot of people think it's, I don't know what it is. It's when is that weed trying to start? When does volunteer weed start? When that cover is already growing. Next spring, April, it's time to go out, put out a pre-plant herbicide. The strip right here was no cover crop. The next strip was the 35 cents an acre grain sorghum. 35 cents an acre seed plus the trip with this drill. I didn't have to spray volunteer weed. Also, that's got anhydrous already injected in it. You can see the knife mark here where there's no cover. Where there is the cover, there isn't any knife marks. Our farm manager likes cover on the weed stubble because anhydrous goes on a lot easier. Again, it doesn't show up on the economics of the spreadsheet, but it shows up in manageability of the field. We had to do the burn down on the strips. We had to do the burn down of the entire field because our sprayer is wider than the strips were. Come post-emerge time, corn is up and growing. The cover is on the right, no cover on the left. I could have saved burn down, I could have saved post-emerge both with that 35 cents worth of seed. I had to do a post-emerge. Okay, I did a pre with residual. I did a post. Here's near harvest. There's the cover. There's no cover. I had weeds all season long. We do it for weed control. I love it for that. It really reduces the weed populations. Here's the interesting one. The year later, farm manager came to me and said, you got to quit doing cover crops. I go, why? It says the deer are down in the creek grazing locust trees. They eat the locust pod, they come out, graze your covers, and they're pooping. Locust tree seed with fertilizer. And it's pretty much those 6 rows, a skip a group, another 6 rows, brought out the plot map. The 6 rows of locust trees is the non-cover strip. I don't know if the fact the cover was growing there, locust trees didn't get started. I don't know if the cover was growing there to discourage the deer. I have no idea what. But it is noticeable every year. The no cover strip, I have problems. And again, that one doesn't show up in the spreadsheet. That one shows up at the spray bottle and the hooker for locust trees. We grow some seed wheat. When you combine seed wheat, you leave the first half pass around the field. I said I plant cover into all of our wheat. When do you plant the cover? You plant it the day the harvester leaves the field. Every day you delay, you're wasting sunlight and carbon dioxide. That first half pass around the field was going to be combined when we were done with wheat harvest. I started drilling covers right behind the combine. The outside pass for the covers wasn't planted until a week later. This is after 12 weeks of growth. The outside pass has 11 weeks of growth. 1 week difference. Look how much I gave up. I said I don't graze, but if you were a grazer, look how much feed you just gave up. Now the grain bin's back there. I was moving the auger on the one bin. On top of the bin, I looked out across that and I go, this is interesting. Took this picture. Again, you can see the height difference. But on that outside pass, remember half was combined a week ago, half was combined the day the cover was seeded. I walked out there, the cover was seeded on that far right, the day it was combined, 1 week with no cover. Look how many weeds are in the next strip. Something wasn't growing there, Mother Nature decided to grow something for me. The day the combine leaves the field is the day you see your cover. Here's wheat harvest on a different field. This is my 14-way cover. Again, not very thick there. The next pass is the no cover. Mother Nature's filling it in for me. That's the 14-way mix. That same no cover strip, the plot next to it, on the other side, very few weeds, only velvet leaf. That's chickling vetch. Chickling vetch suppressed everything except velvet leaf. I have no idea why I didn't do that one. And again, that's what Sam Ortman found out. If you want to suppress all the weeds, you need a diverse mix. You don't do a single species. Cereal rye on the mare scale works great, but it may not work on some other weeds. But again, I got a lot of farmers say, I can't do a cover. I don't have enough moisture. This is a Kansas producer. I took this picture. Baled up his straw, you remove the residue, you let weeds grow to use water, and he doesn't have moisture, and he's wishing his way his water anyway. Why not grow something? Why not grow something? Hailed out. I already have the nitrogen there. I already got some water there. Grow something. We got a lot of hill fields, flooded fields that get planted in covers simply to feed soil biology. You know, here's one that was hailed out. There's nothing growing there. You can see how much erosion we're going to have without putting a cover on there. Again, NRCS in Nebraska has done a lot of work with this type of damaged fields. Prevent plant acres. There was a lot this last year. NRCS had a program for covers. Again, that's to feed the soil biology. This one wasn't even planted until late. This has a living root there. And I get a lot of farmers say, well, so what? You can't harvest that. Here's the so what. Some of you guys were affected. 2011, Missouri River was out. Some fields are flooded for 4 months. We had a little bit of that again this last year. This is what it looked like in spring of 2012. John Wilson, our extension educator up in Tacoma, says it wasn't pretty. And again, we had some of this last year. John went out and worked with this producer to wake up the soil. He went out in late February, early March, and seeded oats, or oats peas. This is irrigated corn, where he had no cover, it was 210 bushel corn, where he woke up the soil biology. 75 pounds of oats sprayed out 6 weeks later, picked up 31 bushels of corn. The peas picked up a little more. To be truthful, I think I could have bought nitrogen cheaper than the pea seed. But the key was he woke up the soil biology. That's what I'm after, is feeding the soil. Soil biology. Think about heat in the soil as well. This is my long-term tillage plots. This is back a few years ago. First week of June, we had 5 days in a row over 100 degrees. The tilled soil with no residue. Grain sorghum went dormant. Grain sorghum hung on. When the rain came, it took off growing. Everybody says grain sorghum's drought tolerant. Look at the no-till in the background. 35 bushel per acre difference when the combine ran. At that time, I thought it was just the residue. No, it's the soil biology, I think, because of the heat. And when you start thinking about the heat, this was the first day of summer, June 21, 1 o'clock, sun's directly overhead in daylight saving time. That's one of my fields. Went out with this infrared thermometer, shot the side of the barn in the shade. It says 86 degrees. Sure enough, the thermometer in the barn says 86. If you think metric, 30. Went out and shot the soybeans. Soybeans are transpiring water to cool themselves a little bit. So they're 10 degrees cooler roughly. Shot the bare soil right next to the soybean row. There's not much bare soil there. 133 on an 86 degree day, and the sun's been beating down on it. I like steak. Throw a steak in the grill. 133, 5 minutes, turn over, 5 minutes. That's a nice medium rare steak, right? Safe to eat because you killed all the biology. Killed all the biology. We need to protect the soil, keep it covered. The top of the residue cover, 124. Sun was beating down on it. Pull that residue cover away. 76 again. Again, that's on an 86 degree day. I went to South Australia, did a meeting there, and it was the same time that Rob was doing his big meeting on cover crops, and everybody was in Omaha. And they had to settle for me as a speaker because everybody else, Rob had in Omaha. I get to pick on Rob here. That's back in 2014, I believe it was. This is an area that gets 8 to 10 inches of annual rainfall where I was at. And the week before I got there, it was 120 degrees air temperature. Cool front came through and it was only 80 or 90, 95 when I was there. This is what their pasture and rangeland looked like because of the heat and lack of rain. This is where I learned a lot more about soil biology. This is a long-term no-tiller who bales his residue. Think about his soil biology. He uses a combine that has a platform head and he bales his residue. His neighbor has a stripper header. Hold up wheat straw from both of them. Stripper header looked like this. This is simply temperature management, keeping that heat off the soil surface. When you look at those roots, it's just like my corn. Which one has biology rotting off the roots from below? That stripper head short stuff has got no biology, and you saw it bare soil, you can imagine why. Again, keep the soil covered. Now, that's no cover crop, nothing to feed the soil biology, that's simply temperature management. To the row, cover crop in a 10-inch rainfall area. Drug my foot across there. I'm going, huh? Where's that water coming from? It's not so much where's water coming from, it's this side is unprotected and the water's evaporating. Get the sun and wind off the soil surface by growing something. Again, the further west you are, the more important it becomes. More rainfall, the more important it becomes. This was his cover crop in the wheat stubble. He says that cover crop doubles his wheat yield compared to no cover crop. And I'm sitting there scratching my head going, how the hell does it double wheat yield? It's soil biology. He's keeping the biology alive. Where he had no cover, the soil was dry. Where he had cover, he had a little bit of moisture, but more important, he had soil biology. He had only this much root on his sunflowers, but that was enough to keep soil biology alive. And that's where I'm convinced cover is important. It's not how many tons of biomass did I produce. It's how much did I feed soil biology. With that, I do produce more biomass. But again, I'm not managing for biomass, I'm managing to feed the soil. This is my 14-way mix a little later in the growing season. Again, if you want to grow more biomass and feed livestock, go to the breakout sessions on livestock. They'll talk about that, but you will manage that different. Oops, wrong one. I'm doing it to feed the soil. According to the soil survey, this soil has only got 6 inches of topsoil. Well, 2005 I started covers on it. I'm growing soil by putting carbon into the soil. That's closer to 12 inches of topsoil. Again, that's where I'm doing my covers. It's wheat and stubble with cover in it. Dig soil pits, look at the soil structure. Quick commercial for Crop Watch, our crop production, crop scouting newsletter in Nebraska. It's also our extension portal to all of our extension information on different crops. You can go over there and click corn, nitrogen, and learn about nitrogen management. You can go click cover crops and check the recommendations from our agronomy group on what to do for covers and so on. Attend field days. And when you do field days, look below the soil, look at what's happening. With that, there's no clock in here. I have no idea how long I went through.
Right on time.
Right on time. Mark the calendar. Keith, you'll see me again.
Any questions for Paul? He's going to be here for a session.
We got a session on planting equipment.
That'll be in this room.
It'll be, okay, this room.
Yep.
And I'll talk about planting into covers. There are several slides I have that are usually in this talk that I pulled into the other talk, and including one of even Keith Thompson's seeding into a cover. Keith's going to be on the presentation panel this afternoon and talk about some of the stuff he's doing.
So we're going to take a 15-minute break. So let's go visit the vendors, get a drink, and the C conference room. There's either a little access door here to the left, or you can go around the hallway. Crop production's in this room, and then AB will be livestock. So thank you, Paul. It was a great talk. was like August application. you know, you said it's too late. It was in August. We were done with harvest by Labor Day.
So that's why
But that's the backstory to that slide.
Notice I left your header on there.
No, appreciate it.